She didn't hear me come in. That was the first thing. The second thing was her phone, screen bright in the dim living room, our conversation thread open, her scrolling upward through it slowly. The way you scroll through something you have read before and are reading again, not for information, but for something harder to name. My name at the top of the screen. Our texts going back 2 years. I stood in the doorway for 3 seconds without saying anything. Then, I said her name. She looked up. She saw me. She didn't close the phone. She looked at me the way someone looks when they have been caught, and made the decision, in the same instant, that running is no longer a realistic option. I saved every single one, she said. Not as an apology, not as an explanation. Just as a fact, she had apparently decided I was ready to hear. I stayed in the doorway. I had no idea what to do with that sentence. My name is Marcus Hall. I'm 33. I teach high school history at a school 20 minutes from my apartment. Mostly sophomores. Occasionally juniors when the schedule collapses and administration starts moving pieces around with more confidence than the situation warrants. I have a 2-bedroom apartment I could afford alone but preferred not to, which is why, when my previous roommate relocated for work 2 years ago, I posted a listing and meant to be careful about who I selected. Her name was Donnie. Danny Reyes, 27, who worked fully remote for a branding studio and kept 3 monitors on a standing desk in the 2nd bedroom and owned more houseplants than seemed structurally advisable for a rented apartment. She had dark hair she kept in a loose knot when she was working and let down in the evenings, and a pair of silver earrings, small, deliberately mismatched, one a star and one a crescent, that she wore every single day without exception, including on her worst days. Which I knew about, because I knew what her worst days looked like. Her laugh arrived slightly before she decided to allow it, which meant it was always the real kind. She was the sort of person who remembered things, not in a way she announced, but in a way that surfaced. She'd set the exact right thing in front of you before you'd articulated that you needed it. The way she found the apartment, she came to view it on a Tuesday evening in January, noticed the large historical map of Mediterranean trade routes on the living room wall, and asked me about the Silk Road's relationship to Byzantine commerce. I did not show her the 2nd bedroom for 90 minutes. She took the apartment. She kept a strip of photo booth pictures pinned to the corner of the fridge, 4 frames, slightly overexposed, from a friend's housewarming she'd brought me to about 8 months into us living together. In one frame, I was laughing at something out of shot. In another, she was looking at the camera. In the last 2, we were both looking at each other. She had put it up one evening, and I had never asked her about it. I had never treated it as something worth asking about. We had been roommates for 23 months. We had never been anything more than that. In the way you keep not crossing a line until the line has become such a permanent feature of the landscape that you forget it was ever a choice and start thinking of it as geography. I have poor pattern recognition for the things that matter most to me. This will become relevant shortly. The evening it happened, I was supposed to be out. I had been on 3 dates with someone named Jess, a friend of a colleague's, smart and perfectly fine, no specific fault I could locate. Our 3rd date had been scheduled for that Thursday. She'd canceled that morning by text. Something had come up. She was sorry. She'd be in touch about rescheduling. The tone of it was the tone that means she won't. I was fine about it, more fine than I should have been, which was its own particular kind of information that I chose, on the platform waiting for the train, not to look at directly. I'd told Danny I'd be back late. I came home at 7:45. The apartment was quiet in the specific way it gets when only one person is in it. A quality of stillness that has a different texture than empty. I came through the door quietly, dropped my bag without announcing myself, moved through the entryway. The living room overhead light was off. The lamp by the couch was on, throwing its low warm circle. I came around the corner and she was there, on the couch, in her usual spot, legs tucked under her, phone held in both hands and tilted slightly toward the lamp. She was scrolling slowly, not the fast, hunting scroll of someone looking for a specific thing. The slow, careful scroll of someone reading what they already know by heart. I saw my name at the top of the screen. I saw the alternating message bubbles. I saw the date stamps going back. I understood in the space of 1 second what I was looking at. I stood in the doorway and counted to 3. She still hadn't heard me. The building has solid walls and she was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere inside the phone, inside the thread, inside 2 years of a conversation she had apparently kept. I said her name. She looked up. She looked at me the way a person looks when they have been found and decided, in that same instant, that there is no version of the next sentence that does not include the truth. I saved every single one, she said. I stayed in the doorway. I said, okay, which was not a useful response. She said, you're home early. It got canceled, I said. She nodded once, the way she nodded when she was filing something away. Then she set the phone face down on the cushion beside her and reached for her mug on the side table. She held it with both hands. She looked at the window. I hung up my jacket. I went to the kitchen and made myself a glass of water I did not particularly need and stood at the counter and drank it slowly. I told myself, she is a person who keeps things. She has 3 backup hard drives. She still has birthday cards from 4 years ago in her desk drawer. She has kept photo booth strips on the fridge since November. This is simply who she is, sentimental, particular. The texts were convenient. The phone was already out. She was having a slow evening and went looking through old conversations the way people do, aimlessly, without purpose. It happens to everyone. The fact that it was our thread was incidental. The fact that she said what she said was the specific sentence of someone caught off guard, not the specific sentence of someone disclosing something. People say things when they are startled that don't mean what they sound like. I built this case thoroughly. I built it the way you build a case when the evidence is against you and you have decided in advance what the verdict must be. I was convincing to myself for approximately 4 minutes. Then I thought, she didn't close the phone. When I said her name and she looked up, she didn't close the phone. She had 1 second to decide, and she didn't hide it. She let me see it, and then she said what she said, and the order of those 2 things was not an accident. That is not the behavior of someone caught doing something incidental. I poured the water down the sink. I did not know what to do with the next hour. The problem with an explanation is that once it starts to crack, it cracks all the way. The next morning she came into the kitchen later than usual, which meant she had slept badly. Which I knew because I knew the sound of her sleep scheduled the way you know things about someone whose bedroom shares your wall and whose rhythms you've absorbed without meaning to. She poured herself coffee and stood at the counter and said, almost to herself, 2 years ago this week was when I moved in. I looked at her. I don't know why I know that, she said lightly, like a small observation about her own strangeness. Then she took her mug back to her room. I stood at the counter. She knew because she had kept track. She had kept the date the way she had kept the texts, not as a grand gesture, not as something she announced, but as something she quietly made room for in herself. The second thing was the photo strip. I noticed it 3 days after the couch incident, not the strip itself, which had been on the fridge corner since the November she put it there. but what it was pinned with. I had never looked at the magnet carefully. I looked at it now. It was a specific flat magnet, pale blue, with a small print of a coastal town that I recognized from a text she'd sent me on a weekend trip to visit her grandmother, 2 months after she moved in. She had photographed the gift shop rack and asked me which one to get. I had been unhelpful. She had bought one anyway and used it specifically to pin up a strip of photos of us. I stood at the fridge for a longer moment than the fridge warranted. I was beginning to notice that I held a significant amount of information about Danny Reyes that I had never thought to treat as significant. The third thing happened on a Friday evening. I was at the kitchen table grading papers. She was in her room with the door cracked, the way she left it when she wasn't on calls, the signal that the apartment was shared space and not a closed system. I could hear the occasional small sounds of her working. At some point she made a sound, not a word, just the quiet sound a person makes when something they are reading reaches them. I glanced up from my papers, heard nothing more, went back to work. Later, in bed, I thought about it, and I realized I know what that sound means. I know the difference between her sounds, the one for funny, the one for surprising, the one for something genuinely moving. I had been cataloging them for 23 months without ever asking myself what I was doing with the catalog. The fourth thing was the smallest and the most damaging to my narrative. Saturday morning, she handed me my coffee in the mug she'd bought me for my birthday in the first year. The one with the small chip on the rim she had apologized for 3 times and I'd told her 3 times didn't bother me. She handed it to me, without mentioning the chip, without apologizing again, without making anything of it at all. Just handed it to me and went back to her laptop. I stood there holding it and thought, she stopped apologizing because she believed me. She adjusted around the thing I said I meant, because she trusted that I meant it. That hit harder than I expected. That Sunday afternoon, she worked at the kitchen table with the winter light coming low through the window, laptop open. Earrings catching the light when she turned her head, hair loose, her pen turning slowly in her fingers when she was thinking something through. I was in the living room with a book. I turned 7 pages and retained the content of none of them. I was watching her in the peripheral way that only works if the other person isn't looking, and I was thinking about 2 years of a conversation saved in a phone, and a magnet bought on a weekend trip, and a date stamp she knew without trying to. I was thinking about all the things I knew about her that I had been calling convenient and proximity and close friendship, and I was doing the slow, uncomfortable arithmetic of realizing that none of those words were accurate. She made tea at some point without asking if I wanted any, and then set a second mug on the coffee table in front of me, chamomile, which she knew was what I drank when I was trying to think and not getting anywhere. She sat back down at the kitchen table without comment, without making anything of it, and went back to her work. I looked at the mug. I looked at the photo strip on the fridge corner, visible from where I was sitting. 4 frames. The last 2 where we were both looking at each other. I thought, I have walked past that strip approximately 400 times and never once asked her about it. I had treated it as wallpaper. I had treated a significant amount of things as wallpaper. She got up to refill her water glass and paused at the fridge. She looked at the photo strip. Not a glance. The kind of look you give something you are in the habit of checking on. Her hand came up, briefly, and straightened it against the tile. A millimeter. Then she dropped her hand, filled her glass, and came back to the table. I looked at the window. She looked up from her laptop. I was already looking away. I felt the specific quality of being watched by someone who is working something out about you. It lasted several seconds. Then I looked over at her. She was looking at her screen. We were very composed about this. composed, was doing an extraordinary amount of work. At dinner, she asked about a student I'd mentioned weeks earlier, a sophomore who'd stayed after class with questions about Weimar Germany and turned it into 40 minutes of actual conversation. She remembered the student's name. She asked the exact follow-up question I hadn't expected her to still be holding. Something shifted in my chest. Quietly, the way the important things always do. I looked at her across the table and thought, I have been narrating this wrong for 23 months. She was at the kitchen table Sunday morning before me, coffee made, mine set on the counter in the chipped mug. I poured it and sat down across from her. She was holding her own mug with both hands, looking at it. "Danny," I said. She looked up. "I've been thinking about it since Thursday," I said. "Since I walked in." She was very still. "You don't have to explain it," I said. "If you'd rather we let this go, I can do that. We eat breakfast and I forget what I saw and nothing has to change. That is a real option." She looked at me for a long, careful moment. "I don't want to let it go," she said. She set her mug down. When she started talking, she looked at it rather than at me, which was the only part of it that looked like it was costing her something. "I saved them because I kept going back to them," she said. That's the actual answer. Not sentimentality, not habit. I'd be in the middle of a bad day, or just an ordinary one, and I'd find myself looking at one of them. Something you sent at 11 at night about whatever you were watching. Something from when I was sick, and you found the exact pharmacy that had the thing I needed, and just texted me the address like it was nothing, like you hadn't looked up 3 different locations to find it. She paused. I saved them because I wanted to be able to find them. Because they were the ones I went to. She looked up. That has been true for longer than I was honest with myself about. That sentence did something quiet to the room. I kept telling myself it was just how we were, she said. That we were close. That some people are close like this, and it doesn't mean anything specific. She looked at me steadily. And then I'd find myself reading one of those texts again, and I'd think, okay, it means something specific. I looked at her. She was watching me carefully, not anxiously, but with the particular attention she brought to things she took seriously. I said, slowly, the date on Thursday, when it got canceled. I was more fine about it than I should have been. I noticed it on the platform waiting for the train home. I thought, I should feel worse than this. And then I thought about coming back here. I held her gaze. You were the first thing, not as a fallback, just as the natural answer to what I wanted to do next. I've been telling myself that was friendship, comfort, proximity. I shook my head. It stopped being that explanation a while ago. She held very still. Every girl I'd been on dates with in the last year, I said. I kept running into the same comparison. Not intentionally. I'd be at dinner with someone and think, that's not how Danny would have said that. Not in a critical way. Just as information. I stopped. That's not what you do with a friend. That's not what proximity looks like. She looked at me. Something in her face had let go of the thing it had been holding on to. She reached across the table. Her hand covered mine. You always said you didn't mind the chip, she said quietly. I didn't. I know you didn't. Her fingers closed. That was the one that got me. That you just meant it, without making it into something I owed you. She looked at me steadily. I think that was when I started. I turned my hand over and held hers. We sat there. The coffee was going cold. Mr. Farouk's television started up from the apartment above, his evening news, at the volume that had generated a building notice 2 winters ago that nobody had complied with. We both looked at the ceiling at the same moment. Then, at each other. He found a documentary series, I said. I'm glad he's engaged, she said. 3 months later, the photo strip was still on the fridge. Same magnet, same corner. I had stopped pretending I didn't know what it meant. She caught me looking at it one morning while making coffee and said nothing, which was exactly the right response. I said nothing back. We were getting good at the things that didn't need words. 6 months after that, a student of mine asked the class what the difference was between a primary source and a living memory. I thought about the answer for a second, longer than I should have in front of 30 teenagers, and then said, a primary source is a document that captures the moment. A living memory is what you keep returning to, because it still means something now. The class moved on. I wrote it down when I got home, thinking I'd use it again. Danny read it from across the kitchen table and looked at me. That's from tonight, she said. Today, I said. 7th period. She smiled in a specific way she had. I did not require further information. A year after that, she moved it when we repainted the kitchen, and when she put it back, she placed it differently, more centered. Deliberate. Leveled against the tile the way you treat something that has been decided rather than inherited. I watched her do it and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. 2 years later, when people asked how we started, she would say, he came home early on a Thursday, he was supposed to be out. I would say, she was reading 2 years of texts, and she didn't close the phone when she saw me. We never fully agreed on when it actually began. She thought earlier. I thought a specific Thursday. And neither of us argued very hard, because we both knew the honest answer was that it had been accumulating longer than either of us wanted to admit. Nothing important appeared overnight. It had simply stopped being something we were managing. It had probably always been her. I just needed to come home early on the right evening and find her holding something she had been quietly saving for 2 years. Before I understood what I had been saving too,